The Retirement Cafe podcast, episode 15. How to choose a care home with Hollie Clarke.
Retired or thinking about retirement? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe podcast. In each episode, we bring you an important conversation with insight, tips and knowledge, all designed to help you live a fulfilling and successful life in retirement. Here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner and accredited later life advisor, Justin King.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast. This week I'm addressing one of the biggest concerns people we work with as they progress through their retirement. The concern about possibly needing care in later life. In episode 7 I interviewed Graham Duffy on the topic of funding the cost of care, and we spoke in some detail about the care annuities and why they may be a suitable option for some people. Today I'd like to share a conversation that I had with Hollie Clarke from Colten Care, in which we discuss how to find a care home that best suits you or your loved one's needs. As a senior care advisor with Colten Care, Hollie helps residents and their families through the transition into care. Now, if I ever find myself in this situation, I would love to have someone like Hollie support me through what must feel like a minefield. Hollie is empathetic and genuinely cares about the well-being of the residents and families she supports. So here's my conversation with Hollie on the Retirement Cafe podcast. Welcome again to the Retirement Cafe. I'm really excited to be joined by Hollie Clarke from Colten Care. And Colten Care are a provider of nursing care in the local area. They've got a home really close to us in Mudderford that a number of our clients have used and had used the facilities and really enjoyed their stays there. So welcome, Hollie.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm very well.
Good. Hollie, can you tell me, how did you get involved in care and what do you do for Colten Care?
I've been working in the elderly care sector for about 10 years or so. I originally started work as a carer in my early 20s. I then moved off and took a complete different turn and went in to go and work for an organisation where I was actually headhunting within the care sector. Within that time, setting up a small business, I came into contact with a lady who actually asked if I could go and work for her.
Oh.
It was another care provider, and she wanted to take me on because she wanted to ultimately have somebody as a liaison point to help people through their situations into care, give them information, signpost, and be able to help them just move and have that transition into care much easier. That was up in London and worked across 11 homes. And then at that time I was approached by Colten Care and they wanted to do essentially a similar service. But what they wanted to do was on a global scale with them. So we operate across 20 homes and they actually wanted us to be able to set up a customer service department so that we had a number of people, of which we now have 12, in field working across 20 different homes to engage and help people within care. So that's essentially how I kind of rolled into it and fell into it. It wasn't something that was my job role. It wasn't something that 10 years ago on the marketplace. It would have been ultimately within care homes itself. But we've seen the market shift somewhat, and actually due to the complexities of people's finance and funding, etc. These days, it can be a bit of a minefield. So that's kind of where we are.
Great. So that's interesting. I didn't realise that you'd actually been involved in care yourself. So you've seen it from both sides.
Yeah.
And you say Colten have got 20 homes. Can you just give me an idea of the geography of them? Where are they spread from and to? And how many residents would you look after?
Absolutely. So as it stands at the moment, we've got approximately 1,100 residents.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're a relatively large operation now. The company started about 35 years ago, and it was based down in Lymington. And it was actually a chap called Adrian Otten and a chap called John Colwell. John Colwell was a builder. Adrian Otten himself, he operated care homes. And they got together one day and were having a conversation about how Adrian would actually like to operate a care home. So John built him a care home, and it started from there. So since then, that was 35 years ago, and we've actually got 20 homes now, and we've got 16 in Dorset. We also have one in Salisbury, 2 in Winchester, and 1 in West Sussex. We've got another that is just due to open up actually in Bournemouth, which is a brand new facility, and it's Art Deco throughout. Okay. So that's going to be opening up in spring. And really it's for elderly people. What we like to do is be able to have them, they might not be very mobile any longer, and find it difficult to get out and about. So we love to have beautiful gardens, and we love to have incorporated within the homes part of their history. So in the local area, or for example with Art Deco, we have a lot of people come to stay with us who lived through the 1920s, 1930s. So that's what we try and do, really.
With your experience, I mean, not everyone, well, hopefully not everyone's going to need care, but a lot of the people we talk to in the retirement space are worried about it. They plan their finances, they plan their retirement, but this kind of elephant in the room is, what on earth are we going to do if we need to find care? How are we going to make sure we can afford it? And then they've been through this situation where they've tried to find a care home for their parents, and it's a nightmare. I mean, it's really hard and it's difficult, and I've helped guide people through it. But what would your advice? I mean, this is across the UK, so not everyone will have access to Colten Care. If you're in the northeast of England or what have you, that you're not represented there. So what advice would you give somebody who was just even thinking about it, thinking, what am I going to do if I need care? How am I going? What are the steps someone would take?
I think the very first provision is planning. Really, I think what generally happens, and particularly due to funding these days, and various different sources of funding, and the amount of people that there are within the UK who are self-funded, is actually the earlier you plan for it, the better the care provision will actually be. So I think that's the number one, really. If you're in a situation where it's perhaps a crisis situation, or there hasn't been enough time to be able to plan for that, then really the first places that you want to be looking are to speak to the social workers, the local authorities, and see if there's any funding available to you. And then further, once you've ascertained what funding there is to be able to move into care, that's when you can start having a look around. There's a great website called carehome.co.uk.
Right.
That particular website, it's pretty much got all of the care homes registered in the UK on that website.
Right.
And fundamentally, it's excellent because you can check the Care Quality Commission's report on there. You can also have a look at the reviews that there are available. People who are actually living in the home and family members have posted reviews about those particular care homes as well. So you can get a good grasp for them before you even walk in the door. So I think they would be the two main points. The Care Quality Commission sites, carehome.co.uk. And I think really the biggest advice I can give is to go and have a look and use your own gut feeling on those particular homes themselves. It's much like buying a house. You walk in and you get a good feel for it.
What kind of questions should people ask?
Everybody's situation is very different.
Yeah.
And that is why I'm employed. That's why I lead a team of people who are designed to help everybody, whether they're in a crisis situation or they're planning for the future, whether it's for themselves, whether it's for a loved one. But essentially, what you want to be asking is how long a manager has been in post, how long the clinical lead has been in post, whether or not it's a well-settled home in terms of staff. You want to be asking about food, of course, activities, stimulation. That's hugely important. Unfortunately, it's quite a sad fact that a lot of the homes that you go into, it costs an awful lot to actually stay within, but there's not an awful lot of outings. There's not an awful lot of activities and stimulation. And I don't know about you, but if I was just being looked after to a very high standard 24/7 but had nothing to do, I'd feel pretty poorly.
What kind of things do you offer then in your homes, for those types of, activities and outings and such like? Have you got some examples?
Yeah, I mean, every day in each of our homes, there's at least 4 or 5 activities that are going on
Right.
in various different places within the homes. People, of course, choose whether or not they want to come and join in on them. And actually, those activity plans, I'm very pleased to say, it's the first company I've worked for, where the activity is actually the companionship team, as we call them. They plan the activities and they actually, a few days before the beginning of each month, will publish the next month's activities plan. So residents and their families can choose, of course, what they do and don't want to come and join in on. We also have minibus trips twice weekly for all of the residents, and of course they're incorporated in all of the fees.
Where do people go? What do they like to do?
A lot of the time they will tell us what they want to do, so we'll make the activity schedule around them. The other week they wanted to go and see, this was a little while back, they wanted to go and see Wicked at the Mayflower Theatre. So that's exactly what we did.
Great.
Took a minibus over there, and there's about 20 residents that we went over with, and they had a great time, absolute great time. Things like that, for example, that was an outing to the theatre, but down here on Rutherford Quay, for example, when the sun was out, we all just went down there and had a picnic down by the quay. And had some live music that came from one of the colleges, and we try and incorporate as many areas of the community as we can. So schools, for example, older people's clubs, knitting clubs, for example, they come in, knit and natter. Yeah, I think the key to it is the more people that we actually have coming into the home, the more variety that there actually is.
Sure.
In terms of the community and diversity.
Now, one of the things that happens with the conversations I've had is one of the scary things is for people who may suffer from dementia. That's probably, if I think about it, it's probably the biggest fear that when I chat to you. I mean, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that as well, but how does someone find how do they find a care home that works for that?
Most of the time, the individuals, they do stay at home for as long as they can.
Yeah.
Who are living with dementia. Dementia itself, the disease, it's in first stage, middle stage, and last stage dementia. And that's how it's known.
Right.
Within the first stage, people are generally quite forgetful.
Yeah.
Within the middle stage, they can be very, very confused within their environment. And sadly, by the nature of the disease, dementia in the last stage requires nursing. I think it would depend on what stage the individual is at, as to the right home for them. But at the same time, somebody who's looking for their loved one to come into dementia care needs to evaluate the homes that there are on the marketplace, because it's down to the registration. An awful lot of the time, homes will say that they look after individuals with dementia, and it will be registered for residential, nursing and dementia care needs. But actually, if somebody is in their first stage or their mid-stage dementia, they're usually very able. They're usually very physically able and still able to walk around. They need to be in an environment where they can do that.
Right.
They need to be in an environment where they can walk with purpose and be able to explore in the gardens with sensory environments around them. And that's something that a nursing, residential and dementia care home wouldn't do. It's unfortunate that is the case, but the reason being is because in a nursing, residential and dementia environment, you have a mix. You have people with mental capacity living within there, and then you have people who've lost mental capacity as well. So in terms, it's just completely different environment.
So how do you, Colten, do you have specific homes for dementia, or are they mixed environment? How do you manage it?
It's the first company that I've worked for, a care company that do it this way.
Right.
And actually, when I started working for them, I fully understood
It's a separate situation. So you have some care homes are purely dementia specialist care homes, are they? Right. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all of our homes are residential and nursing homes.
Yeah.
Which means that an individual coming into our care wouldn't have to move again if their needs change at all. And that's the biggest concern that a lot of people have.
Of course.
They, once they've made that move into our care, they don't have to move out of it per se into a different home. We can care for them. But we have 4 specific dementia homes, which are dementia nursing homes within Colten as well. And if you went into them, those ones, had a look at the dementia homes and then went into the nursing and residential homes, you would see the difference.
Right.
The colours are different, the interior design, the gardens themselves, as I mentioned earlier, they've all been planted with highly scented and highly coloured plants for sensory stimulation.
Right.
The activities that I mentioned earlier on, the companionship teams, they would craft their activity schedules, their monthly activity schedules around sensory events and activities. Whereas in a nursing and residential home, they would be geared around stimulating people who still have mental capacity. It could be the case that we do a debate over Brexit, for example, within there, which we have done, and it gets quite heated.
I'm sure.
But that specific morning of debate wouldn't be appropriate within our dementia homes.
Right. Okay, that's great. That's really helpful, I think. Can I turn to the thorny issue of paying for it? Now, obviously, as a financial planner, I come across this relatively often, but I mean, you're at the coalface, you're actually at the point where people are entering care or coming to talk to you about coming into care. And the price of it is pretty scary, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, on the face of it, it is. When you actually break it down into care, the care that an individual is receiving, the facility that they're living in, of course, all their hotel and hospitality, catering services, their activities and outings. When you break it down into that, it's actually more malleable to take.
Right.
I think a lot of people these days, we're seeing a huge shift that a lot of people want to stay at home. They want to stay at home with domiciliary care packages.
Right.
And actually one carer, it's probably worth staying at home with that help. As needs change, 2 carers are required. As needs change again, 3 carers are required. When you actually look at that, we often have families come to us that say, Mum really wants to stay at home, Dad really wants to stay at home, but actually we've just totted up the finances and realised that we're paying in excess of £6,000 per week for domiciliary carers to be able to come
care at home for that's what domiciliary means, is it? Right. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And when they do that, they then start to evaluate when actually they could come into Colten Care. Their mum's looked after 24/7.
Yeah.
Great environments, and actually it's a third of the cost.
And how do you deal with the other kind of emotional setup where there's a couple, one needs care and one doesn't? That must be quite amazingly difficult for a family to deal with, or for a couple to deal with.
Generally, initially, I would say initially it is. If you take, for example, a family I was working with the other day, and their mum and dad had been married 60 years. They lived in the same house for 60 years.
Wow.
And one individual needed care and needed to come into full-time care. And her husband didn't really want to do that. He was her main carer. But actually caring for someone on a 24/7 basis is hugely tiring for him as well.
Sure.
So we suggested perhaps they come in just for a respite break, to come into our home and try it. They are in their 3rd week of a 4-week stay at the moment, and both of them have decided that they want to stay.
So even though he doesn't need care, he can stay as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got quite a few people who that actually happens to. So we have quite a lot of people who are on a residential stay. A lot of them still drive. They still, live with their independence. But their partner or their wife or husband may very much be in need of that care. The difference is when they come in, they know that their loved one is being cared for, and at the same time they can still effectively live with each other. We have dual rooms a dual occupancy room so that they can come and stay in our home together, but just be cared for. And it alleviates the worry from the one that doesn't need clinical care.
Great.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that could be done. That's very useful. This has been great, Hollie. It's really informative. What's the future of care? I mean, we're all being told that the retired baby boom population is, moving into the retired, it's growing every day. More and more people are, getting older and we're living longer. It appears quite frightening, the idea of millions of people going to need care. Are we going to be able to provide it?
I think so.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite evident with the amount of new build care homes that there are. There's a huge amount of them. We have, a huge amount of sheltered accommodations that are being built as well. So I don't think that is a systemic problem whatsoever. Okay. I do think that nursing, for example, is then, we were having a conversation the other day, and unfortunately, nurses, as we all know, on the news, are in quite short supply.
Yes.
So I think from that standpoint, the government, we're going to have to do something from a clinical care base and clinical training.
Right.
But actually, at Colten Care, we've taken that into our own hands. We're actually training our own nurses.
Ah, okay.
So we've had an awful lot of people that have worked for us for very many years, and some people not for a huge amount of time at all, as healthcare assistants. And actually, we've just opened up the opportunity to be able to put them through bursary, essentially, to train as nurses and train on the job as well.
Wow.
I'm really proud of that. Started in September.
Excellent.
Hopefully, ours will be homegrown.
Sure. And just something that I'm sure you know about, but I appreciate that it's probably not your expertise, but maybe you can answer the question. You mentioned sheltered accommodation a second ago. So do you have an overview of what are the choices for people? So, we've got a couple, let's say, who sat at home and they're needing care, or they're getting elderly and they're thinking maybe the property they're in is too big for, it's a family home and now they don't need such a large space, or they're having difficulty getting up and down the stairs or what have you. But maybe they don't need to go into care per se at that moment. What are the choices that they should be considering? What are the different environments they could be, choosing to, I suppose, downsize maybe, or to move into?
Quite often, the choices are invariably a care village or a care home.
Right.
Or, of course, sheltered accommodation. Sheltered accommodation is an option for a lot of people. I think to downsize.
So sheltered accommodation, what's your definition of sheltered accommodation? Is this when you've got a warden there and people can ring a bell if they need assistance and that type of thing? Is that it?
Exactly it.
Right.
It's warden controlled. So generally, I mean, there are older facilities, there are new facilities that are being built, and generally they've got between 40 and 60 individual flats that are within one large building that is a secure building.
Okay.
So people live independently. They do all their shopping, their cleaning, for example, and live fully independently. It is just the case that they are downsizing into a flat that maybe has 1 or 2 beds. And within these, there is a warden. They'll generally work sort of 9 till 5, commercial hours, and there to assist and help if needs be. And there would usually be perhaps one communal room that they may do an event or activity once per week, for example. That is a choice for some people.
Sure.
But what we are seeing is that a lot of people are inquiring at the same time that they're looking to inquire about sheltered accommodation. They're coming to inquire with us as well, or with care. And it is simply because of the residential factor that I mentioned to you before. We're starting to see that if people do, that there's a hospitality factor, as it were, that people are coming into care on a residential basis, and they have their meals cooked for them. They have their hotel, their catering done for them, their outings, and they don't have to worry about anything.
Sure.
So there's that option too. So yeah, I mean, there's quite a few options out there, and I think as well, particularly with care villages, I certainly know that the newer homes that we're building at the moment, they're care villages, and by that I mean there's all sorts of facilities on site. I mean, there's tennis courts, for example. One of the proposed buildings that we're going to be having will have a swimming pool on there, and there's all sorts of.
Yeah, this is not the typical view of a care home, I don't think. That's the idea of tennis courts and swimming pools. And
actually, going on to a typical view of a care home, it's very, very difficult when you're talking about care options and sort of planning for the future as to whether to go to sheltered accommodation or whether to go into residential and nursing home. The news, our news really doesn't help us a great deal, or help anybody at all, because they try the negative stories that there are that come out about nursing homes. For every one negative story, there's 1,000 great stories that are happening. And I think as soon as people are looking to explore, have a look at sheltered accommodation, but equally come and have a look at the homes as well, because a lot of people are very, very pleasantly surprised with what they see, and it goes completely against what is being fed to us by the news.
Well, that's some good news. Some good news. So, it's been brilliant talking to you, Hollie, and I found that really informative, and I'm sure our listeners will have done as well. So there's a couple of websites that you mentioned. I'll put those in the show notes. What are the last thoughts, I suppose? What are the last thoughts of, you're thinking that this might be on the horizon, etc. You're across the UK. What do you do? So we go and visit some care homes. It was one of your suggestions, I think, and look at some retirement villages and make some comparisons.
Absolutely.
How do we understand? How would people get more of an understanding how to pay for it?
I think that goes back right at the beginning of the interview. Really, I think the earlier that you start planning for your care provision, the better. But I think in the instance of when you're actually having a look to see what would be suitable for you to move into, you have to go and see them to actually ask. I mean, Colten Care, we're very transparent with our fees and how much the care fees are. Other companies, not so much. So it's about choosing a number of homes to go and have a look at by using the carehome.co.uk, by doing research, go and see them, find out how much they cost. Also, be very careful in making sure that you know that the fees are inclusive of care, of food, of outings, of activities. The reason that I say that is there are a number of companies out there where it seems very, very reasonable to come into care, and then actually in your first month, you'll find that there's £500-600 additional care and additional expenses. So I think that's the biggest word of advice, really. Great.
Well, that's really is sage advice. Well, thank you so much, Hollie. It's been really wonderful to chat to you today. And I'm sure there's a huge amount of information. Where, if people need any more information about you or Colten Care, is there a way they can get in contact?
Absolutely, yes. On our website, it's www.coltencare.co.uk. If you head onto the website, all the contact details are on there. All of the homes have their individual microsites as well. They all have the Colten DNA running through them, but of course, facilities, each and every one of them is purpose-built and very unique. So, by all means, take the time to have a look on the website, and contact details will be on there.
Great. And if someone wants to go and have a look at a care home, can they just turn up, or do they need to make an appointment, or what do they need to do?
With us, you can just turn up.
Wow.
Of course.
Okay.
We ask that people. It's completely up to them. An awful lot of people will call and ask if it's okay to come in, and of course it is. We'll make an appointment. We'll make the time to spend, whether it be half an hour or whether it be half a day. It's to get it right for them. I think a lot of people, and me personally, I would just turn up.
Right.
I would go and have a look, because you would see the home and it's
catch them unawares.
Absolutely. See the home and it's in its own environment, because actually, you'll be able to go in and see the natural flow of it, that there are activities going on, and that people are are having a jolly nice time, really.
Right.
I personally would do.
Good. Well, sounds something to look forward to. So, thank you, Hollie. As I say, I'll put all those bits and information in the show notes. And once again, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
So I think there were some great tips there from Hollie to think about if you find yourself needing to select a care home for yourself or a family member, especially with regards to dementia sufferers. You know, if I ever find myself in that position of needing to choose a care home for a loved one or in later life, I'd certainly want to find somewhere that employs someone like Hollie who can hold my hand through that transition. As usual, you can find the show notes and some useful links to websites where you can get further guidance on selecting a care home on our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk. Next week, I'll be sharing the first of a two-part series on how to retire if you own your own business. A client, a friend, and a successful businessman, Barry Van Danzig, joins me to share his personal story of the transition from business owner to retiree. If you haven't done so already, head to iTunes or our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. Until next time, this is Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Cafe podcast with Justin King. To find out more, you can find us online at theretirementcafe.co.uk.